this darkness once more. I have not the clue, the motive. Young Gerald Paintner had a pretty good motive, remarked Chap grimly. He's been wild enough in his time, I can tell you, and extravagant. You know what artists are too, no morals at all. Perrault did not pay much attention to Chap's sweeping strictures on the artistic temperament. Instead, he smiled knowingly. My good chap, is it possible that you throw the mud in my eyes? discovered. Well, at any rate, we know that Gerald Painter had nothing to do with it. You always know so much more than I do, Hastings.